Hi, class. I wanted to check in with you again and give you a couple of thoughts related to last week's modules and sort of moving forward a little bit. So I'm wondering, how are you feeling about the last module and where we're at so far? Some of this material, it's hard to explain sometimes. When we're doing this at a distance, and it's hard for me to know how you're feeling about some of these things when I don't get to see your faces all the time. So I wanted to kind of check in, see how you're doing. Last week in the module, there was a lot of information about logic models, and logic models are really important. So in research, when we talk about research, which is where you would have sort of learned about logic models before, we spend a lot of time thinking about forming a really good research question. Now that's going to come up in this week's PowerPoint because remember, these are all the same strategies and techniques and things. But when we think about evaluation, remember, we're looking at applied stuff, right? So it's not just, can I research something in a vacuum? It's, what is the good question and how does it apply to the people that I'm trying to help? How does it apply to the agency that I'm looking at? So it's more of an applied kind of map than we would have done for research. Now, often in research, when you are researching something that's related to a program, you do logic models, and so you probably learned about it in your research class. But there was a lot of information in this last module. There are a number of different ways to do logic models. People, they can look like all kinds of things. They can look really crazy, or they can look very straightforward. Sometimes they're a nice straight line. Sometimes they're kind of like this. Sometimes they're vertical. But the idea is that you can sort of follow a path and you have this kind of map that leads you through what the things are that get put in, what the activities are that you're going to do, and what the short-term immediate things that you're going to see or your immediate outcomes, and then the long-term goals. These are all on that map. Now, the reason we always do this in evaluation is because that becomes our roadmap. So when you do your literature review, which you're looking at this week, and I know you all know how to do them, but I posted some stuff for you there because it is very critical. Remember, the last announcement that I posted for you talked about not reinventing the wheel and being able to back up your statements with evidence. So this week you're looking at lit review stuff. When you connect those things, your logic model gives you the areas that are really important. And so then you can keep going back to your logic model at every phase of your study design so that you can then know, like, what are the major areas that you need to cover in your lit review, what are the major things that you need to be able to define, and also to be able to match your measures. When you start thinking about how you're going to measure your outcomes, you should be able to go back to your logic model and say, oh, right, these are the things that I said I was going to be looking at for outcomes or a long-term goal, so I should be measuring that. If you have measures that aren't related to anything on your logic model, then you really should be asking yourself, is that a necessary measure to have? Because especially when we're talking about working with nonprofit agencies or with partner agencies, one thing that you will always hear is that, oh, this paperwork is too long, people will never do it. Let me tell you, people will do a lot of paperwork if you ask them to. But you get better completion rates and people are happier if you're not asking them for things that you don't need. So if your study, for example, does not have an outcome related to lowering depression, you have to have a very good justification for including a depression inventory or screen or measure in your measures, because then what you're talking about is like asking people to fill something out that you may not necessarily need. Now, if you want to collect the data and there's a good argument for it, then by all means. But you have to be able to back those things up and in your lit review show that these things are related, because agencies will ask you why each question is needed, and you should be able to back that up with something more than my personal opinion, right? Like, here's why we think these things are related. So comment in the comments below about how you're feeling about that logic model module. If you found that helpful, I tried to put some extra material up there because I know a lot of people sometimes like being able to see lots of different approaches. So some of the information that you had came from a more management kind of approach and used some of that language. Logic models are used not just in social sciences, they are very often used in business. In nonprofits use them all the time. So it is a good tool. If you're a visual learner, you probably, once you get the hang of these, you'll love them forever. It is a visual map of your program and what you're trying to do. And it gives you a way to sort of jump off into other things like what are your outcomes, what are your measures. A couple of other things I wanted to mention to you. As we go forward in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see some things that look really familiar. I mentioned this earlier to you a couple weeks ago that you're going to see a lot of very familiar things. You're going to see things about variables, things about strategies and research methods and so on. So don't be surprised and don't panic. You got this. You've already learned this stuff. It should be mostly reviewed to you. Remember, when we talk about evaluation, we're using the same strategies and techniques that we learned in research. So all of that stuff that you learned before, and don't worry, I don't expect you to remember it all. I know nobody does. I didn't the first time. So that's why we review it, because you're going to be applying these things with new eyes. You're going to be looking at them in a new way. You're going to be thinking about these strategies and techniques in terms of applying them to help determine evaluation of your program or your agency or whatever it is you decide that you're evaluating. In this next PowerPoint, you're going to see, in this next week, you're going to see information about variables and creating a good question. Remember, those things do still apply. We're just using a little bit different language here. So think about those in terms of program evaluation, in terms of helping an agency identify what it is that we want to study, what are the variables, and what are those outcomes, okay? You can use your logic models. Sometimes as you're going through some of the next couple of modules, get your logic model, stick it up on the screen, and then you can sort of see where you are in there, and hopefully it will help things fall into place. It is the same strategies, so you've got this. You've already learned it. I think that should be it. A few of you have emailed me about getting together. I did want to mention that if anybody is interested in coming, I do have an in-person class. They are a hybrid class, so they meet every other week. They meet on Tuesday nights in the math building, which is over by Milliken Hall in the library on that side of campus. So if you're on campus on Tuesday night and you would like to come, I checked with them. It's a very small class. It's like 8 people in that class. If anybody would like to come attend that class and have some of these discussions, they are pretty much tracking along with you guys in mostly the same content. So if you do want to attend, they said they would be totally fine with anybody joining them for an evening. Just let me know. And you're welcome to come join us if you want. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me if you want to schedule an appointment to get together, to talk, to go over any of your assignments. I'm assuming you guys are kind of tracking along and things are going okay for you, so please feel free to give me some feedback. You can post it on this discussion board or any of the other discussion boards under the announcements or discussions. Ask questions, talk to one another in the discussion board, and let me know how things are going for you. All right? Have a great week. Take care. Bye.